Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to be here with you today. We're talking about age. It's not just a number. In fact, it's a journey. And so this is something that's very near and dear to my heart. Aging is not something for us to be feared. It's not something for us to be avoided. It's going to happen to all of us at one time or another. The problem we have, though, is that ageism is all around us. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about how ageism affected me. And first of all, who am I? Well, I'm Gary Uremovich. I'm a retired Air Force officer, retired physician assistant. I've been widowed after 47 years of marriage. I'm newly married for 3 years, and I'm a member of this particular Christian church. But that doesn't define who I am. You might have similar sorts of credentials. That doesn't define who you are. We're far more than our identity as far as our profession, what we do, even our faith. We are far more involved and mysterious. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about that. Are you aware of ageism? Well, I wasn't until a few years ago. And my wife was dying of ovarian cancer, a 9-year journey. And during the last year, it was pretty difficult for her. So I retired from medical profession as a physician assistant. I retired and I spent time with her in order to be her caretaker. And so I was so involved in that when she eventually died, I didn't know who I was. Have you ever been on a journey in a train perhaps, and you kind of like get engrossed in something and you go past your stop? It felt like that is what happened to me. The train kept going. I was involved in daily life, trying to nurture my wife. And then after she was gone, I looked up. I'm in a different country. I'm in a different world. I no longer have my profession, my best friend, my confidant. I had nothing. The last meeting, we said the ego is not your amigo. And that is true. My amigo, my ego, was gone. I had nothing in order to pull myself back together. It was a dark time for me, dark night of the soul. And I was broken and I was lost. Maybe you've been through something similar. It's at that time I realized ageism isn't just something that is around me. Ageism was within me, that I was an ageist. I had what Connie Zweig would say in her book, The Inner Work of Age. I was the inner ageist. That for me, I thought, no profession, no family, no life. And so I had a very difficult time. And so what I'm here to try to do is to alert you to become aware of ageism. And think about the biggest ageist in your life right now. It might be a family member. It might be someone that you work with. It might be someone you come in contact with that says derogatory things about you based on your ability or your lack of ability. And look at who that person might be. I'm here to tell you, it's you. You are the biggest ageist in your life. And so for you to become aware of that, I think it's going to be helpful. Carl Jung and Richard Rohr have spoken about the second half of life. Carl Jung was a contemporary of the great psychiatrist Freud. And so he coined that phrase about the second half of life. The first half of life, we build things. We build our career. We build our profession. We build our financial security. We do all of that. And here is some of the building property that we have. Family and friends, relationships, faith, profession, work. successes and failures, education. We have over here experience. We have lots of different containers, and we build them during the first half of our life. And then when we retire, we suddenly think, well, all these are irrelevant. They don't count anymore. How strange to enter into the second half of life thinking everything I work for is meaningless. And that is reinforced by our society. When you go to the medical office and you say you're retired, they don't say, tell me, what did you do? Where did you go? What sort of experiences did you have? No, retired means irrelevant. They no longer want to hear what you have done or what you think or what you know. Is that true? Have you experienced that? It's something that all of us will experience. We hate people that are prejudiced, that are racist, sexist, that look at people based on their gender. They objectify so many things, and all that is abhorrent. That is to be avoided at all costs. The one prejudice that each of us will experience, the only prejudice that each of us will experience, is ageism if we live long enough. That is the one prejudice that we have been indoctrinated with since childhood. And it carries us forward, and we continue to believe these ageist lies. I'm here to tell you, you don't have to believe them. We look at these containers. The containers are valuable. They are experiences that mean something to us. And in the book of Esther, remember her uncle tells her, it is for such a time as this that you have been born. Can I tell you, it is for this time that you have been born. That all of your experiences, we need your wisdom, we need your experiences, we need you to empty out your containers, to rearrange them. You see, there's a couple of containers here that don't have a name on them. And that's because I don't know what's in them. One is kind of dark, and so these are the dark areas of my life that I really don't want to deal with. Anger, frustration, disappointment. I really don't want to look at that. There's the other, the sort of clear one. This is what other people see that I've never heard, that I've never discovered. I need to learn about these as well. So we're going to be talking about containers. What are your containers? Your containers are the things that have made you, you. All these experiences, all these adventures that you've had, these are things that have created you to be you. So be aware. If someone is ageist around you, or they say something ageist, confront them. Say, wait a minute, I don't think that's appropriate. Now, if someone says a racial slur, I hope you have the courage to stand up and say, that is not needed. That is not called for. Same thing with ageism. Things that are said to diminish someone because of their age is to be avoided and confronted. So I'm a military guy. I like acronyms. The acronym I have for you is AGE, age. So we've already done the first one, being aware. You need to be aware of ageism, but especially of the inner ages that all of us have. I was shocked to discover that I thought I was pretty open and easygoing until I discovered that I was an ageist, and I felt condemned. I had nothing in order to show who I was. The reality is, I am far more than any of these containers. These containers help mold me, but I have been created for such a time as this, and so have you. So the second is guilt. So we have awareness, and I'm calling you to awareness now. But guilt. You see, we are made to feel guilty for being older, for being a burden to society or even our families. And our families don't mean to do that, but it's part of this ageist sort of narrative. They don't realize how they make us feel, how they make us feel dependent, how we make ourselves feel dependent. So 1 in 5 Americans are going to be over the age of 65 by 2030. That's not too far off. We spend $1 in 7 of GDP for upkeep of our elderly. We try to figure out different places where we can warehouse our elderly to keep them out of the way, to keep them kind of nurtured and pulled out of the way. So we know that all of us have ageist attitudes, but we are made to feel guilty about that, that somehow we're a burden. And we look at medical costs. The medical cost, you realize in 2020, they did a study that ageism costs $16 billion per year in the medical field for care of elderly. Why? Ageism causes medical providers to misdiagnose, for them to overprescribe medications that have consequences, to do surgeries in order to gain financial remuneration, do surgeries that maybe aren't indicated. And so there is an ageist element that increases the cost of health care for elderly. So let me tell you something. If you go to a medical provider and you're a little older, take someone with you. Never go on your own. My wife, she went to see her family doctor. She was 65, and she said, a female internal specialist said, well, you don't need an internal examination, but I'm having lower abdominal pain. Well, that's your bladder falling, because old people have bladders that fall. I never knew that, but that could explain a lot. But anyway, so she went there, and it was 6 months. She went to see the same doctor several times, same story. Then, as a PA, I was building a program for training PAs, physician assistants. And so she said, Derek, just touch my abdomen. I don't think it's right. I touched her abdomen. There was a big mass there. The following day, she had an ultrasound that confirmed that she had ovarian cancer. That was missed. That doctor then withdrew care from my family, including me, and she went to a different practice, I think to avoid us. So I should have been there with her. I should have said, wait a minute, you haven't done a physical exam. She didn't even touch her abdomen. How many times older people are run through the office? Have you experienced that? You have a couple of complaints, and the doctor says to you, we have time for 1 or 2. The third, we don't have time for that. As a medical provider, very often it's something that's said on the way out the door that's the most critical, that needs to be dealt with. And so people are afraid to say, I have this chest pain. Instead, they'll talk about, I've got a little cough, I've got a sore throat. And then when they're walking out the door, they say, by the way, I have shortness of breath and chest pain. Wait a minute, we have to talk about that. All the other stuff was getting you comfortable with being here, but now you need my help in diagnosing the problem. So, guilt. We're made to feel guilty. There are 3 historical references I like to cite. The first one is in 1618. Thomas Middleton, a contemporary of Shakespeare, he had this comedy. It was a dark comedy called Age Law. So age law, at the age of 55, people would be killed because they're too old. It was sexist as well, that a woman would be killed off at 55. Men could go up to 75. So it was sexist as well as ageist. It was a comedy. I don't know about you, but that's not very funny. But it must have been hilarious. It was very popular. That was in 1618. We see the dynasty precipice in Scandinavia. These were big cliffs, and once a family member reached a certain age or certain incapability, they were brought to the precipice, and the family would have a long pole, and they'd push their loved elderly person off the edge of the cliff. And so that's legend. We're going to Sweden. I hope Vivica doesn't want to introduce me to the precipice. But, and then in Japan, 1 in 3 Japanese citizens are over the age of 65. That's a pretty high percentage. And in Japan, they had this movie at the Cannes Festival that was applauded. It was satirical, but it was called Plan 75. That at the age of 75, Japanese citizens could go to the government and get a pill in order to take their life. As long as they took their life, they'd be given a stipend. And they could go out for dinner, come home, and do the deed. That was something that was satirical. They did a survey, and the survey indicated that a majority of 75-year-olds in Japan would take the deal. You see, guilt is dangerous. It somehow stimulates the inner ageist. Say, I don't want to be a burden to my family, to society. I want to do what is right. That is not appropriate. And so here we see that there are instances where we encourage elderly to move out of the way. Now, you have earned what you get from the government as far as Medicare and Social Security, and all that is appropriate. So you have already earned it. So you shouldn't feel guilty for allowing that to be part of your resources. In effect, what we've done is we're pushing our elderly over the precipice based on faulty metrics. That ageism is what increases the cost. That if you feel as if you are going to be a burden, inevitably you start to behave like a burden. That you start to say, you know, I really can't do this, I can't do that. They did a study. Rabbi Schachter Shalomi, he cites a study where they had people over 75 at this resort. And they encouraged them to pretend that you're 20 years younger. Just pretend. And so they dressed 20 years younger. They listened to the same music from 20 years ago. They referred to their family as if they were still young. And so they did that, and they discovered something interesting. That the people that pretended that they were younger, they actually looked different. That independent observers, they saw these people and saw before and after and said, well, this obviously is a picture before. Not just because of their clothing, but their visual expressions, because they were feeling as if they were younger. And they did studies on their hearing and on their flexibility, on their posture, and they discovered that they were all improved. Now, how did that happen? It's because attitude matters. If you think you're going to be old and decrepit, guess what? You become old and decrepit. Don't get me wrong, we have challenges. I've had a couple of surgical procedures that I needed. Many of you have as well. Don't get me wrong, we have challenges. But if the inner ageist makes us feel as if there is nothing ahead but gloom and dread, that's the way we're going to live. Does that make sense to you? That we live in a self-fulfilling prophecy, that we behave in a way that fulfills our deepest and darkest fears. And so for us to be careful not to do that. Finally, we have awareness, guilt, ending. Now, when we talk about ending, and I was going to bring another prop, but a book, that there is something that was said on the, I think you've got it, over there, that piece of paper.
Which one? Here?
No.
Oh, no. Sorry, it was a quote by C.S. Lewis. And C.S. Lewis says that you can't change the beginning of your life, but you can change how it ends. And that's the importance for us to see, is that the ending is up to us. The beginning, I was a kid in Chicago. I was on welfare, and things were hard, things were difficult, things I wouldn't want to go back to. But guess what? I can change the ending, and you can too. And so the ending, very often we talk about death. And death in our culture is to be feared. Death is to be avoided. Let me tell you something. Death is a blessing because it gets me activated. I don't have time to waste. I have to do what I'm going to do now. I can't waste my time. When I was young, I said, well, I'll do it maybe next year. And so once Vivica and I started to realize that ageism is something that we have, we got rid of it. And since we've been married, Vivica helped me get my PhD. We wrote a couple of books together. She's writing a novel called Women Unseen. I'm writing a third book. We're starting a publishing company because elderly people with wisdom, they need to have a voice, and I want to give that voice to them. That's why I'm doing this, because I want to be a voice for those that maybe think they don't have a voice anymore. Because our culture is so youth-focused and productivity-focused. We are wise people because we have all these experiences. So the ending, let me tell you about a story. It's a woman that's a friend of mine, and she's given me permission to share her story. But she started off in Europe, in a small little village. She went to a very hard school. It was a Latin high school, and she excelled there. She excelled in languages. And then she visited DC and met a Japanese man and fell in love with him. And she went back to Europe, and a year later she came back with 35 cents in her pocket. And she married this young man. She worked at the Library of Congress as a librarian, specializing in her languages because she was gifted. And she focused on that. Eventually they moved to Tampa. And when they moved here, this young lady decided to get a job at the Hillsborough Community College. And she took a course in computers. Computers were brand new. Nobody really was into them at that time. She took this course, and then she was working in the library, but she decided that the library needed to be digitalized. She went to the college president and gave him her idea. We need to digitalize all the books here and on every campus, 8 campuses. He gave her the job to do it, and she fulfilled the job remarkably well. And she focused on her finances. Eventually, her husband died, and she had built up her finances, had paid off her mortgage. She was sharp. She knew how to orchestrate her containers. And then she was a widow for 12 years. And then she eventually discovered someone that had been recently widowed. And TG is Vivica.
I knew that. Coming in, probably.
And she rescued someone that was lost. a lost widower. And she has taken these containers and she knows how to live life. And some of the things in her containers, for instance, when she commits to doing something, she does it. She has an incredible faith. As a youth, she wanted to be a missionary. She's a missionary now, here in the portico. In Yellow Springs, Ohio, she's a missionary there. She is someone that has faith, she has focus, and she has integrity. And all these are things that she brings with her. So your containers, you need to realize that your containers are there for a purpose. They're not irrelevant. They are incredibly important for you to explore. You see, there's a joy graph, and the joy graph is like a happy face. It's a U shape. And so when you're 50, 40 years old, you're down on the happiness scale. Why? Because you're building these containers. Once you hit 60, 65, 70 and higher, the happiness graph goes up. Why? You're no longer working for the man. You're able to do what you want to do. And so what Richard Rohr would say in his Upward Falling book, he would say, we need to fill these containers with purpose, with meaning, with insight, and discover what's in there. You see, one of the problems I have is I have a lot of boxes back at home that I haven't looked at. And Vivica said, Gary, you need to look in the boxes. So I have, and I've discovered some interesting things that I forgot all about. And so what are in your containers? You need to start looking at them, examine them. Because once you see what's in there, then it all makes sense. There might be experiences that were negative. Well, you need to look at it and say, what made that negative? Reevaluate it. Life review. Look to see what you have done and what is important about that right here, right now. Why are you here? If God has you here, you're here for a purpose. It might be something as easy as being a friend to other people. It might be something being a mentor to other people. One of the things that I'm doing now is I'm tutoring online in reading. And kids in Harlem, in Austin, Texas, people that are in Miami, I'm tutoring them how to read. And not just how to read the words, but how to understand literature. And how important that is. Why? Because I was a professor. That was one of my containers. I was someone that loved reading as a youth. That's one of my containers. Now I'm pulling it out and I'm using it in order to make a difference. You have things in your containers that can make a difference in the lives of another person. It might be faith. That you have an incredible faith that needs to be explored, and other people need to be able to see who you are as a faithful person. So we have lots of cartons, lots of containers. Can I encourage you to look inside and pull them out? You might need somebody to help you do that. Find a friend. Find someone that can help you explore your lives. If you want to write a book, and I think every person has a story that needs to be told, then find a way to write a book, and I can help you with that if you like. But you need to avoid the ageist narrative that once you're retired, it's all irrelevant. Human beings are never irrelevant. And at this moment in time, we need more wisdom than ever. That we are focused so much on productivity, so much on argumentative approaches to living, that we need wise elders that can step forward and say, wait a minute, enough of the bickering, enough of the arguing. Let's really look at this in a wise way. Now you might say, Gary, well, we're all going to go old. I don't want to obsess about it. I'm not talking about obsessing about getting older. Society does that for you. They'll obsess about how old you are. Instead, what I'm saying is explore what you have been blessed with. It might be experiences that you have never thought about. Some of my darkest experiences, some of my failures, are the things that have made me into the kind of person I am today. They've benefited me. At the time, I thought getting fired from my job as a professor, as a program director, that was devastating for me. Looking back on it, what a blessing. I could have been in a sterile room for my entire career. Instead, they kicked me out. Praise God. And so there are things that happen to us. We don't think they're good at the time, but we need to reflect back on them and see how it all fits together. And so what I was thinking about is having lots of different things, little props inside these. That would take up too much time. But you need to look at your containers and pull out the material that you have stored in there. Maybe you've forgotten that. Anyway, it's my pleasure to be with you. Age, it's not a number, it's a journey. And don't be on a train and be amazed of finding yourself in a foreign country without any idea where you are, because you are in charge of your destiny. You're in charge of the journey. Thank you very much for being with me.